Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Last spring, President Trump drove official Washington into hyperventilation by publicly claiming the Obama administration had wiretapped members of his campaign staff at his office at Trump Tower prior to the last election. Now, not everything the president says on Twitter is factually accurate, but to anyone who's been in Washington for a while, that claim didn't seem crazy or even really that unlikely. That sort of thing does happen here, and everybody knows it. So imagine how confusing it was to see a parade of prominent Washington figures leap forward to denounce Trump's claim as not just untrue, but insane. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan confidently told reporters that, quote, "We have not seen any evidence of wiretapping at Trump Tower or on anyone within Trump Tower." Richard Burr and Mark Warner, those are the two top senators on the Senate Intel Committee, and they would know. They dismissed the claim as well. The Justice Department denied surveilling Trump staff, as did then FBI Director Jim Comey, while giving sworn testimony before Congress. So suspicions confirmed, the media laughed derisively. Wiretapping? Come on. That's tinfoil hat stuff. It's nuts. Now, in another time, with more trustworthy institutions, that would have been the end of the story. But we live in a country with deeply corrupt institutions, and so it turns out all those patronizing assurances that nobody's spying on political campaigns were false, and probably intentionally so. According to a new report from CNN, Paul Manafort, who for a time last year was Trump's campaign chairman, was wiretapped by the federal government both before and after the election. Now, Manafort, it ought to be noted, had an apartment inside Trump Tower during that time, so it's virtually certain that surveillance of him would have included other members of the Trump campaign staff, maybe even Trump himself. In other words, it looks like Trump's tweet may have been right. So why did three top members of Congress from both parties and the country's top law enforcement officer all assure us the surveillance didn't happen, that there wasn't a shred of evidence to suggest it had happened? Were they lying, or did they simply not know? Neither answer is comforting. Either the intelligence agency has gone rogue, pursuing its own goals without meaningful oversight from elected officials, or our officials are colluding with one another to lie to the public, apparently for political reasons. Either way, something ominous is happening in Washington. Last year's election terrified the permanent class here, mostly because it was a genuine populist uprising that they couldn't control despite all efforts. Since the election, they've done everything in their power to reverse the result or simply pretend it never happened. In an ironic twist, they become exactly what they claim to oppose. They collude behind closed doors to push a narrative of secret collusion. They compare the president to Vladimir Putin and then use secret surveillance and politically motivated leaks to menace their political enemies. And then, for good measure, they lie about it. In the name of protecting democracy, they're doing everything they can to subvert the results of a democratic vote. Irony of ironies. No Russian hacking has ever threatened this country more than that. Solomon Weisenberg served as a deputy independent counsel during Ken Starr's investigation of the Clinton administration those many years ago, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Weisenberg, thanks a lot for coming on. It seems like...
Thank you. Many years ago.
Many years ago. I remember it very well. It seems like, to civilians like me, a very big deal for the federal government, independent prosecutor, or anyone working for the federal government to initiate a wiretap against a campaign official in the middle of a campaign. Would that have given you pause? Does that seem weird to you?
I think it's worrisome if it happened. We don't really know for sure whether it happened. And I think, Tucker, it's good to keep something in mind for you and all your viewers to keep it in mind. Having been through and participated in a high-profile investigation like this, you can just assume that 50% of what you read, at a minimum, about what Mueller is doing is utterly false. And you can assume that at least 50% of what Mueller is doing at any given time is not in the papers, and you have no idea what it is. Now, that being said,
by the way, that's my assumption about everything. Everything I hear in Washington, I take 50% off the top of everything. But this specific allegation that he was wiretapped, that Manafort was a subject of government surveillance, is something that's been floating around for a while, and it does seem possible to me. Does it seem possible to you?
Well, certainly in light of the CNN story, it does. Now, you always have to look at who is sourcing a story, but I agree with you that if something like this happened, it's very disturbing. It doesn't mean that it's automatically something that was wrong and shouldn't have happened, but I think it's very troubling anytime one administration goes and tries to get a wiretap of a major figure in the party opposing it, certainly opposing its party in the upcoming election.
Right. Well, we know what happened to Michael Flynn. I mean, we know what happened to Flynn. So, I mean, it doesn't seem crazy to assume it might have happened to Paul Manafort. So the nature of this investigation, and again, I'm discounting the 50% that you suggested, but seems to have changed, from what we can tell, from an investigation into collusion between Trump and people around him with the Russian government into an investigation that includes financial dealings going back some years, long before he entered the last race. If that is true, that does seem like mission creep on a pretty grand scale.
I think Mueller has a pretty broad, if I remember his charter correctly, he has a pretty broad scope of inquiry, and that's common in investigations like this. And there's no indication that I've seen that Mueller is involved in any of these wiretap applications. But there's no question, when you bring a guy like Bob Mueller on, you're going to get a very thorough and an extremely aggressive investigation. That's the way he operates. And really, Bob Mueller doesn't care what you think or I think or anybody thinks.
Well, he ought to care what we think, because we're American citizens and he's not God. And there was a New York Times piece in which you're quoted that said, and I'm not defending Paul Manafort, by the way, whom I don't know, and I'm not carrying water for Paul Manafort, that's for sure. However, in the piece it said that federal agents picked his front door, the lock on his front door, and emerged in order to scare the crap out of him. And you're quoted saying that's exactly what they were doing. What's the point of that in a free society to behave that way? Why not just ask him to open the door? It seems police state-ish to me.
Well, I wasn't speaking about the particular tactic that they used in that case of basically telling a magistrate, if the story is to be believed, there were exigent circumstances, and then picking the lock. That's very unusual. What I was simply saying is that Mueller, very much like Patrick Fitzgerald in the Scooter Libby investigation, wanted to set a tone very early on, which is what prosecutors need to do when they come in on these investigations. Doesn't mean that's an excuse to act improperly, but he's setting a tone and he's letting people know, hey, folks, I'm not screwing around. This is serious. I know what I'm doing, and I'm not lollygagging around. And there's no question that he's doing that. Now, he's got a number one lieutenant, Andrew Weissman, who's very well known for doing that. The Enron investigation, Weissman, as you know, headed that task force, and that's a task force that had a lot of very legitimate criticism. It very much overstepped its bounds. And as you know, virtually all the Enron prosecutions were reversed on appeal.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and I don't know, for some reason we're more scared of Vladimir Putin than we are of our prosecutors, and we're wrong, in my view. Salman, thank you for your perspective on that. Well, the news that the Obama administration may have monitored Paul Manafort, spied on him, surveilled him, revives a news story you may have forgotten about, the Russian collusion narrative. In case you've forgotten, for several months, our country's political and media elites thundered without end that the country's government had been overthrown. Our government had been overthrown by Vladimir Putin. Here's memory lane for you.
It looks like the FBI does have evidence that there was collusion between Trump campaign members and Russian operatives.
When the story is, again, possibly collusion between Trump associates and Russia.
It's a country who attacked us in the last election, and it's a country where Donald Trump and people on his team have very deep personal, political, and financial ties.
I'm bothered by our country being compromised by a #1 foreign adversary in collusion with our president.
How severe is a problem with Russia? Listen to Morgan Freeman describe it. Watch.
We have been attacked. We are at war.
Juan Williams hosts The Five out of New York every night, and he joins us tonight. Juan, it's great to see you.
Glad to be with you.
So, look, I think you're a reasonable person, and I think it's fair to ask questions about Russia. But now that Morgan Freeman, whom I believe instinctively, and I think most Americans do, has declared that we're at war with Russia, how many troops should we send to Moscow, would you say? More or fewer than Napoleon sent?
Well, I'd say it's a different time, because I think the kind of war that's being conducted against us is obviously a cyber war type of attack, and I think there's not much debate about it. I saw today when our new Trump administration nominee to be ambassador to Russia said without a doubt they tried to interfere in our election.
Yeah, there's not much debate about it, and I would think as a civil libertarian you'd be bothered by that. I know that I am. We're taking all of this on faith from the intelligence agencies, from unseen people with agendas we don't know much about. We've seen this before in a bunch of different conflicts throughout American history where we're lied to repeatedly, and to take their assurances on faith, as we're all doing, seems nuts to me. Why would you join in that?
Oh, because I think there's so many of them. I mean, initially, what we heard, and I don't know how you feel, but from Jim Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, as well as from FBI and Justice Department officials, that there was a clear consensus of all the intelligence agencies, not just one, that in fact Russia had aggressively sought to interfere and succeeded in interfering in the 2016 election.
Is that the same Jim Clapper who also assured us under oath that the NSA was not spying on America? Oh, the liar, Jim Clapper.
You saying that, but I don't
because
think
it's such an obvious follow-up.
Clapper's integrity overall. So,
well, it raises significant questions, but here's what it does. Look, and look, maybe he's
Clapper,
right.
Because it's not just Clapper, it's all of these people. So I have respect for our intelligence community. I think they do a terrific job, and I don't think they have any political motive. But you suggest that somehow they're part of the swamp, I guess.
That's entirely silly. I mean, that they have no, you're from here. Yes. You don't look in the camera and say they have no political motives. Of course they do. And by the way, they've done good work in some cases.
Sure
in other cases, like predicting the fall of the Soviet Union or 9/11, they haven't done good work. So it's a mixed bag. But I'm merely saying this. Why shouldn't we have some more evidence?
Tucker, Justice Department, Trump's own Justice Department, has said there's no evidence, they could find no evidence that, in fact, he or Trump Tower had been wiretapped, and that came out just a few weeks ago. So if there's a political motivation, as you suggest, you would think that a Trump Justice Department would come to some conclusion that's more in line with the idea that Trump's tweet back in March was accurate.
Possibly,
they said no.
though look, that stuff happens, as you know, and my only point is, again and again, I'm an American citizen, and so before you bring me to war, along with Morgan Freeman, I want some evidence. So the U.S. government never examined, the FBI never examined the servers at the Democratic National Committee. And yet, as you know, so I'm only saying, and I would think liberals would join me in saying that, again, before we go to war, why don't you show me one piece of evidence that the government of Russia was involved in hacking the DNC computers? And they have not given us one. Why aren't we demanding it? That's my question. Why are we nodding in this bovine way? They told us this, it must be true. Why would we respond that way?
Well, I don't think that it's a matter of they told us. Again, to my mind, it's a matter of, do you have trust in your intelligence agencies? And I do. And secondly, are they in agreement? Is there somebody standing outside and saying, no, you know, I see it a little differently? Is it the case that Mike Pompeo, now at CIA, Trump's nominee, says, I don't know? Is it the case that Jeff Sessions, now at Justice, says, I don't know? No, to the contrary, they say no evidence that Obama ever wiretapped Trump.
So, no, but on the Russia thing, so basically you're saying if all the kids agree on something, I don't know, Pop Rocks will kill you if you drink it with Coke, or what? Bubble Yum's made of spider eggs. If all the kids agree, then it must be true.
No.
Like, what is this anyway? I'm an adult. Show me the evidence.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, I think that we can ask for evidence once the intelligence reports are made public. We'll have them, but that's not the question at the table. If that's the standard, then there's lots of things we don't know that President Trump knows as President of the United States, and I respect that. But I'm not going to sit here and be a sucker and say, oh, gee, because I haven't seen the details myself, I doubt now the entire intelligence community, the entire Justice Department. I just think that's, in fact, given that Mike Pompeo is at CIA, I'd have to doubt Mike Pompeo and all of CIA. That's a bit much.
I don't know. Let me just say one thing, a compliment to you. I remember back, 15 years ago when the weapons of mass destruction stuff was being touted as irrefutable. And you and a lot of other liberals said, well, gee, I kind of like a little bit more evidence. And I kind of laughed at you. I wish I hadn't laughed at you. I'm serious. And I apologize for doing that because I think trust but verify. I was with you then. I was with you then.
There you
Juan,
go.
in retrospect. Great to see you tonight. Thank you,
Tucker.
President Trump went to the UN today and had a lot to say. We'll show you highlights of his speech. It's getting a ton of attention and reaction from the last UN ambassador under the last administration. Bill Richardson will join us. Plus, it's been almost a year, yet Hillary Clinton says she will not rule out seeking a do-over of the last election. What? Details ahead. President Trump made his first speech to the United Nations General Assembly today. It was an unusual moment, even for the august body where Nikita Khrushchev once banged his shoe on a desk. President Trump touted America's military and economic strength, ridiculed our foes, and threatened to crush North Korea if necessary. Watch.
No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States.
Bill Richardson is a former governor of New Mexico. He was also President Clinton's UN ambassador. He's also been to North Korea many times, and he joins us tonight. Hey, Governor. Thanks for coming on.
Nice to be with you, Tucker.
So there are lots of parts of this speech I thought they were interesting, but the two that jumped out at me as maybe a departure from previous foreign policy regimes were these. In America, we do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone. That's a massive change. And then, as President of the United States, I will always put America first. Does this represent, do you think, a pivot to a foreign policy that revolves around America's interests?
Well, it is President Trump's foreign policy, and he was elected to carry it out, and he was sending a message to the UN that he was going to follow it. On the good side, and you know, I'm fairly critical of his foreign policy. On the good side, he seemed to embrace the need to have a coalition of support on issues like terrorism, like Iran, like North Korea. He acknowledged the UN needed some reforms. What was positive about the UN leadership, the Secretary General, that was positive. I thought his tone yesterday towards the UN using multilateralism, which he rejected in the campaign, as a tool in American foreign policy was positive. You know, where I had my problems, Tucker, was when he referred to North Korea and Iran. I mean, my question is, okay, it's good to be strong, to say that we're going to defend themselves, but is there a strategy behind that? And I don't see it, but I know we'll get into this.
So here's the confusing part for me. So he wants to see North Korea disarm. I think everybody does. Why would North Korea ever disarm after what the Obama administration did to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya? We said at the time, you got to disarm. No more chem bio programs, no nuclear program. He said, okay, fine, I'll do what you ask. And then thanks to Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power, we killed him anyway. So isn't that a really clear message to leaders around the world? Keep your nuclear program.
Well, I think what Kim Jong-un wants to do, and look, I've been there 8 times. I don't know what he wants to do, what his end game is. You know, I don't think he's suicidal, but he's very unpredictable. I think what he has said, if you look at a speech 4 days ago, he said he wants nuclear equivalency with the United States. That means he's going to be building up his missiles, his nuclear weapons. But in the end, I think he's also sending a signal. I will negotiate with you, the United States, not with China, not with South Korea, not with Japan. But I think he's reaching a point where if he is able, technologically, and I think he's very close to be able to hit the United States, hit the mainland, hit Guam, I think it's fairly clear it's soon. He's ready to talk. That's what I interpret, but I don't know. Right. I dealt with his father's regime. I think there's possibly an opportunity now for diplomacy. And my worry about the president, all right, he has to say he's going to protect the country. He's got to say he's going to annihilate after all of these crazy missile tests and nuclear tests. But what's the end game? What's our diplomacy? What is our negotiation? I mean, I don't think a preemptive military strike is going to work. We got troops there. South Korea's got 25 million people. I think it's diplomacy and negotiation. And
well, I don't think anybody thinks that. I don't think any person thinks a preemptive military strike is a good idea, including the Trump people. Let me ask you a totally honest, nonpartisan question. Give me the most honest answer you can. Do you sense that there's a bipartisan push in Washington to push the president toward military conflict with Iran, coming from the same people who basically made America weaker in previous generations with their dumb foreign policy ideas? Do you feel that?
No,
happening?
I don't think so. You know, one good thing I will tell you, I've met General Kelly. I think he's brought some order into the national security team, the National Security Council, Defense, State. I was impressed with the way that he's handling some of the foreign policy issues through
But I don't
the
mean
president.
him, though. I mean the sort of freelance foreign policy intellectual class in Washington, which again has been wrong about everything, but they seem to be pushing this administration toward a more bellicose posture with Iran, and then, I think, toward conflict, military conflict. You don't see any evidence of that at all? Am I being crazy?
No, I do see that. I did a conference today with Governor Jeb Bush, and my view is that the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, keep it in our pocket. It's not perfect, but then hit hard on Iran's support for terrorism. They have 7 American prisoners there, including a guy named Levinson, who, you know, we don't know where he is.
It's awful, a former
We should
FBI guy.
work on Yemen, on Syria, on you know, weapons of mass destruction. What we don't want is 2 nuclear powers.
No, you don't.
North Korea and Iran. So yeah, I think the president should use some diplomacy, keep the nuclear agreement, work on these other issues. That's my view.
Governor Bill Richardson, thanks a lot for that.
All right.
It's been more than 10 months since the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton has not moved on. Up next, we'll talk about a recent interview where she said she's open to challenging the results and demanding that she be made president. Stay tuned. She just can't let go. In an interview with NPR's Terry Gross, Hillary Clinton said she is open to challenging last year's election results, apparently with the aim of reversing them and making herself president. During the interview, Clinton acknowledged that America lacks a mechanism for throwing out a presidential election after the fact, but she pointed hopefully toward Kenya, where the Supreme Court recently ordered an election do-over due to fairness concerns. Kenya is the model. Mark Green is a former New York City public advocate, the founder of Shadowing Trump. It's an anti-Trump advocacy group. But I bet even Mark Green doesn't believe in overthrowing Democratic election results. Does he, Mark?
I think one president from Kenya is enough.
I didn't even see. It shows you how pure of heart I am. I didn't even think of that joke. But, okay. But look, I mean, come on. I don't think Kenya is a deeply corrupt, beautiful place, nice people, but very corrupt. So it's kind of weird to point to Kenya. But why even bring, look, I know she's mad. I know she thinks the Russians and Comey did it, whatever. But to even suggest that in an interview, that's not good for our democracy, is it?
By the way, I am reading Hillary's book, What Happened. I assume, have you read it yet?
I actually, someone sent it to me. It's on my kitchen counter.
Okay, the answer is no. Look, Hillary Clinton is at least 2 things. One, a very smart lawyer. And even a dumb lawyer understands the Constitution never anticipated this. There's no provision for a do-over. The only thing is impeachment of the president or the vice president, and we'll see about that. Second, she's a human being, and she's the only person in American history to, in combination, win the popular vote, lose the presidency, and have a foreign adversary put his thumb on the scale and perhaps tilt the election, according to our intelligence agencies. I heard you kind of deny it, but until they give Tucker Carlson the proof, this is an anomaly.
Right, okay, so, I want to relitigate that. But look, I mean, I just think the problem with talking that way, there are many problems, but one of them is it raises the expectations and the intensity of your own base to such a fever pitch that they become hard to deal. They become scary, actually. And I think that Democratic leaders have said so many irresponsible things in the past 9 months that the Democratic base is totally out of control. And I'll give you one piece of tape that will convince even you, Mark Green. This is Nancy Pelosi in a group full of so-called dreamers explaining how she's on their side. Look how they respond to her.
Yes, I am. You do not. You don't know what you're talking about.
That's a problem. And I hope that's not the future, don't you?
You're complaining Hillary and Pelosi, so let me put them together. I've never met a Democrat who thinks there's a plausible way to contest the 2016 election. And so the base isn't upset about, the base is upset about the result, but without a remedy. If you're worried about a base being upset, I'm a little concerned at mobs screaming, lock her up when Donald Trump is at a podium. That happened. That's real. And in terms of Nancy Pelosi and DACA, look, the public by 2-1 are in favor of making DACA a law. Donald Trump says he is. Paul Ryan says he is. It'll probably happen. 30 students apparently went there and were furious. I asked a Dreamer colleague of mine why. Because Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer seem to be arguing for making it a law, which they want. And he said, look, they're furious and scared about being sent back to a country they've never been in. And at the same time,
they're unreasonable and entitled. They're not even U.S. citizens, and they're demanding of the highest-ranking Democrat in the House. They're screaming at her. It's like, you're not even entitled to vote. Like, what are you doing? You don't see that at all?
Wait a second. Entitled. They're allowed to speak. So they are engaged in a form of protest that you and I might not engage in. Of course, we've never been threatened with being kicked out of the country. Their argument, tactically, I don't buy it, is they don't want to be bargaining chips, that Pelosi and Schumer should demand a clean dream bill and not say, okay, we'll spend more on the wall. That's tactical. I think this is counterproductive.
Hold on, does it bother you? Does it bother you, the attitude? Look, I'm pro-immigrant, but it just seems a little weird if you come to this country illegally and partake of all the fruits of it and get all the benefits, the federal and state benefits as they have, and then someone says, we're going to help keep you here. You'd be grateful. You'd say, thank you, America. I never hear that. Why is that? And shouldn't we be hearing that?
So America, based on the GOP, a majority of the GOP base, wants to kick them out. So when you say they came here illegally, of course, you and I know, maybe your audience does, they came here as infants. Of course, they didn't have a choice, which is what makes them sympathetic. Tucker, you may want there to be chaos on the left. I have to tell you, the numbers don't bear that out. Donald Trump is still at the lowest level of any president of this. There's a 10-point gap between Democrat and Republican in the generic House vote, and the Russian scandal is breathing down their neck. So
Democrats are united in hating Trump, but what actually does bother me, and I think would bother you, is the total collapse of support for the rule of law and freedom of speech on the left. There are poll after poll after poll showing that a huge percentage of people on the left don't believe that you have an unfettered right to say what you think. That doesn't bother you?
First, that's not true. I saw the poll in the New York Post.
It is true.
No, I saw the poll in the New York Post. A fifth of Republican students and Democratic students in that poll said violence was acceptable to shut up.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
That's terrible. I'm from the Bill Maher ACLU school. More speech is the answer to bad speech. You're upset about the rule of law because 30 scared, angry DACA kids are yelling, and they shouldn't be. And we have a president of the United States who gives Joe Arpaio a pardon after he's tortured people.
I'm worried about the rule of law because you have Democrats openly advocating for ignoring it, for giving illegal aliens the right to vote. You get arrested for hunting without a license, but it's totally cool to sneak in the country and use fake documents to work? Like what?
You and I know Dreamers didn't sneak into the country, right?
Their parents did, and they're getting citizenship too, as you know.
They didn't. We're not talking about giving the parents automatic citizenship.
Yes, we are.
In terms of the right to vote, they want the right to stay in the military. They want the right to finish college. Don't you agree? I mean, Donald Trump and Paul Ryan agree with that.
There are less than 1,000 in the military out of 800,000. I mean, this numbers are just... Anyway, we're out of time. I'm being told we got to go to break. Mark Green, thanks for joining us.
Tucker.
NAACP suing the Trump administration on behalf of DACA recipients for some reason. Up next, we'll talk to a guest who says Trump should countersue the NAACP for abandoning African Americans. An interesting argument. Stay tuned. Well, the NAACP is declaring war on the Trump administration, but not on behalf of African Americans. Instead, the organization is suing to block the repeal of DACA for some reason. That is, of course, the Obama-era program that blocks deportation and gives work permits to illegal immigrants who arrived here as children. Kevin Jackson is executive director of the Black Sphere. He said that Trump should respond by suing the NAACP right back. Kevin Jackson joins us tonight. Kevin, it's great to see you. This story confused me. I'm open-minded, but it does seem like there's a lot of social science that shows that really high levels of low-skilled immigration hurt a lot of different groups, but they really hurt African Americans in employment and wages. I mean, I don't really think that's up for debate. So why would the NAACP want more of it? It's very confusing to me.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are confused, Tucker. Look at what the NAACP wants to focus on and effectively lure Latinos into the country so they can give them some of this excellent service that they've given to black folks since 1903 or 1905, or the forming of the organization, which, by the way, was formed by Republicans. I mean, we've got high unemployment with blacks. That should be a complete focus for these folks.
Yes,
young black teens who are committing lots of crime because they don't have jobs, they don't have opportunity. They've stolen the imagination, the creativity from these young folks, and now they want to shift their focus to helping DACA. It's ridiculous. And the other thing, Tucker, they should add to the lawsuit, Donald Trump, the president, he should add the co-conspirators of Barack Obama, the Congressional Black Caucus, I call them the Congressional Black Circus, and all of the bourgeois cocktail-sipping white enablers who also do the same thing. They are enabling this type of nonsense. The NAACP, if it wants to help black Americans, as you described, they should be focusing on teenage pregnancy. They should be focusing on education, better education. Tucker, we know what a black neighborhood means in the lexicon. We know what a black school means in the lexicon. HBCUs losing enrollment in droves. And so now we've got college kids moving from HBCUs to regular college campuses and doing what? Being disruptive. The NAACP is at fault for almost everything that we're talking about. And guess what? Every member of the Congressional Black Circus is a member of the NAACP. That should tell you all you need to know.
It just seems there's a big difference between ignoring obvious problems, which is bad, and actively trying to hurt the people you're supposed to be representing. And again, I don't think there's any debate about this. This immigration policy and our current immigration policy hurts their members. Like,
absolutely.
So why are they doing this? What is in it for them? Why would you do that? What's the motive?
Well, I'll tell you a conversation that I know of. Former members of the Congressional Black Caucus said, Kevin, sometimes you got to break a few eggs in order to make an omelet. And what they were saying
Robespierre
is,
quote.
Even though, pardon me?
As Robespierre famously said, yeah.
Right. Well, the guy quoted whoever you were just talking about, and the point is this. They were saying that blacks are going to have to suffer while we topple the people in charge, white people. In order to do that, we need to utilize the Hispanics. And so it's going to hurt us for a while. So how is it hurting us, Tucker? When you live in a black neighborhood, it's probably not too far from a Hispanic neighborhood. These kids end up in black schools. English as a second language is a norm around there. All of the different problems that society ends up that we face in the black community are exacerbated when you bring in all of these immigrants illegally under DACA and pretend that you want to help blacks.
Yes.
They do not want to help blacks at all.
It's been a huge issue in Los Angeles, which has been completely ignored by the media, but if you live out there, you know what I'm talking about, and it's really hurt people. Kevin, thank you for that. I'm amazed someone would say that out loud to you. My gosh. Thanks.
My pleasure, Craig.
Could President Trump's effectiveness be limited by supernatural forces? Just ahead, we'll speak to, this is real, a witch who says she is working to cast a binding spell on the president. We'll be right back. President Trump doesn't always do what people expect him to do or even what his supporters want him to do. Is he being unpredictable? Or could there be another cause, perhaps a magical one? Amanda Yates Garcia is the Oracle of Los Angeles. She says she's a witch, tarot card reader, spellcaster, energy healer, intuitive medium, shamanic practitioner, and magical life coach. Last night she helped cast a so-called binding spell on our president to prevent him from causing harm to others. We've asked many witches to come on this program, but only Amanda Yates Garcia was brave enough to accept our invitation. She joins us tonight from Los Angeles. Amanda, thank you for coming on tonight. I just had a panic communication, the commercial break, with one of my producers, Alex, who said, be nice to her. I don't want to spell on me. So I hope that you'll pull back on your powers and spare our staff. What does this mean exactly, that you cast a binding spell on the president?
Binding spells are like any other spell, so they're a symbolic action used to harness the powers of the imagination and achieve a tangible result eventually. Yeah.
And what was the result that you desired?
Well, I desire that Trump stop harming people that I care about and instituting policies that also harm me or other people that I care about. So my ultimate aim is that we protect the people that we love from having harm done to them. But in the meantime, I think what's really important is that we create a sense of solidarity and empowerment within the people who are participating in the spell to galvanize them towards action so that they can feel empowered to make the changes that they want to see in the world.
Most people just go ahead and vote or like buy a T-shirt. Is this legal? Can you run around casting spells on? Are you allowed to cast spells on people? Is there any kind of federal regulation of this?
Well, okay, so symbolic action is something that everybody participates in all the time, right? So you might think, oh, that doesn't really have any meaning, but if that were true, then, for instance, why would people care whether or not people saluted the flag or sang the national anthem? That's also symbolic action, and that kind of symbolic action does have power, and that's why people care about it. So while I don't think that any witch is thinking, oh, this is the only action that is necessary to prevent Trump from enacting his mean policies, I think that they're hoping that by doing these symbolic actions that will galvanize people to resist with our hearts, with our full hearts.
So, since you're the only witch, I've interviewed a lot of people, but I've never interviewed a witch. Sincere question, is eye of newt an actual ingredient?
Well, I think the real problem is not whether or not eye of newt is an actual ingredient. The real problem is we're about to have some kind of big nuclear extravaganza with North Korea. The real problem is that we're punishing immigrant children. The real problem is that we're
right. I mean, there are lots of problems, but that's still
to go into deep debt. I don't think the real problem is whether or not we use eye of newt in our
I'm not suggesting it's a problem, and I'm with you on the student debt, by the way, completely. I don't think Trump did that, but whatever. But it doesn't get to my question, which is eye of newt an actual thing or not?
Eye of newt, isn't that from Shakespeare? So I think he was probably using a little bit of poetic license. Most witches today use whatever we have available to us. For instance, candles and paper.
Does it ever worry you? I mean, by the way, I'm not dismissing what you're saying. I don't think that the only things that exist are the things that we can see. There clearly is a supernatural. I don't understand it, but I wonder if you're ever worried about the consequences of, bluntly, fooling around with things that nobody really understands. I'm sincere. Do you ever worry about that?
You know, a lot of people ask me that, whether or not I worry about the supernatural consequences of what I'm doing. I mean, I trust that what I'm doing is for the greatest good of all concerned, because that's what I hold in my heart. That's what all these witches are doing this for, is because they have the pure intention of creating good in the world, to make a more beautiful, loving, whole, healthy world. And so that's the intention that they're doing this work. So nobody's worried that it's gonna backfire on them, because nobody's doing this spell to cause Trump harm.
So you think, I'm not even talking about Trump, I just mean in general. Oh no, I don't think you are. But you think good intentions will protect you? I don't know. I don't know. It's kind of spooky, but you seem nice, and I'm glad that you came on.
If you need a lesson, Carlson.
No, I don't. Scares me. I appreciate it, though. Thanks for coming on, Oracle Garcia.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Category 5, Hurricane Maria, real hurricane, another one, heading for Puerto Rico tonight. Take you there after the break. This is a Fox News alert. Hurricane Maria smashing through the Caribbean at this hour, heading right toward Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Weather Nation meteorologist Brett Adair is tracking the Category 5 storm. He joins us from Puerto Rico, which, as we said, is in the storm's path. Brett, are you there?
I'm here.
Thanks for joining us. So what do you expect where you are in Puerto Rico, and when?
Well, we're in San Juan, and we're already beginning to feel some of those minimal impacts. We have winds gusting to 30, 35 miles an hour here where we're located on the North Shore near the Atlantic Ocean. We're expecting the full brunt of Hurricane Maria to really plow into the southeast portions of Puerto Rico early tomorrow morning and track all the way across the heart of the island, impacting virtually everyone here in some shape, form, or fashion by tomorrow afternoon.
If that happens, what will it look like?
Well, I know a lot of people have seen the images that are coming out of Dominica and, you know, the images that came out of Barbuda and St. Thomas and St. Martin from Hurricane Irma. And unfortunately, if we continue to see Hurricane Maria pack the punch of sustained winds and, you know, the pressure's still dropping, so it's still intensifying. If we see that continue until it makes impact on Puerto Rico, I have a big fear that we're going to deal with catastrophic damage.
I mean, Puerto Rico is not Barbuda. It's an enormous place with an awful lot of people. It's pretty densely packed. That could be a complete disaster. Really quickly, have people evacuated at all?
Well, most of the people did evacuate. I mean, there are some that were not able to get flights out, but they have hunkered down. We have seen most of the people boarding up, moving vehicles to elevated areas because storm surge and wind are going to be big, big issues here.
Man, it's really horrifying to think another hurricane is coming, maybe the worst of all. Brett, thank you for that. Godspeed. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 p.m. to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Good night from Washington. Stay tuned for The 5. It's coming up now.